Opening for just over 2 months before being abandoned, the story of Wild West World and its creator is just as wild as the theme the park was based on. The cowboy entrepreneur who rode into town on his trusty steed, looking to stir up some fun, but left an outlaw, with a story filled with barbecue, bankruptcy, and the FBI, and one of the shortest operating theme parks anywhere in the world. Strap in as we're going straight to the Wild Wild West. In 1999, just outside of Wichita in Benton, Kansas, Thomas Etheridge and his wife Cheryl opened the Prairie Rose Music Show and Chuck Wagon Supper. They were struggling cattle ranchers, with Cheryl's family raising cattle on the land since the late 1880s, who decided to branch out their company, Restoration Farms, and serve a little barbecue and sing cowboy music to try and increase their finances. The idea began small, hoping to serve around 20 people a week. In the first year, 4,000 visitors visited the dine-in entertainment experience. When asked why they decided to open a dinner show with no experience, Thomas Etheridge said that it was a matter of survival. They couldn't make money living off the land and had to think of a new idea. They had plenty of assets, but no actual cash. A friend had asked them to entertain 24 visitors from France who wanted to see something of the Old West. Cheryl cooked a barbecue dinner, Thomas showed the guests some cowboy stuff and hired musicians to play music. And the response alone convinced them that it could work. After less than a year, they would expand the ranch with the construction of a $500,000, 900 square foot opera house, hoping to attract even more people. Currently, visitors would ride a chuck wagon to an outdoor amphitheater for the show and dinner. This indoor opera house will provide opportunities for 350 people to experience the show regardless of the weather. By 2001, they were expecting more than 30,000 people to visit the attraction, making it one of the fastest growing tourist attractions in the state. Thomas Etheridge would be the master of ceremonies for the dinners, while Cheryl would take tickets and reservations. Though they said most of their success came from the cast of employees who shared a common love of the state's Western heritage. Entertaining the crowd each night, the Prairie Rose Wranglers told bad jokes and played music. The venue would continue to expand with museums, RV camping spots, and each year become more and more popular. Prairie Rose was now a major attraction, and was drawing more tourists from outside the region than any other attraction in the area, and offered good clean family fun while also making a nice profit. The Etheridge family would not stop here. They had big plans for the future. In 2004, the Prairie Rose would launch plans for a second location in Branson. These plans were scrapped as attention was changed to focus on something bigger. On December 19, 2004, the next project for the Etheridges was announced: Wild West World. This planned 30-acre cowboy-themed park would be built around 20 minutes away from the restaurant in Park City. Set to break ground in 2005 and open in 2006, Wild West World was estimated to cost $15 to $17 million, create 150 seasonal jobs, and bring in an estimated $50 million in its first 5 years. The couple had seen the popularity of the American cowboy and thought it would be the greatest opportunity to expand that theme to bring in even more tourism. 100 acres of land was purchased with plenty of room for expansion east of I-135 and south of 77th Street. The initial concept called for 20 adult rides and 10 children's rides, all themed, and would include a roller coaster with wagon-themed trains, be multiple themed restaurants, a theatre, and would have daily longhorn cattle drives through a town square. The new attraction was planned to be open May through September, and excitement for the new project was at an all-time high. At the time of the announcement, the Etheridges had secured half the financing needed for the project, planning to be the only shareholders. They had already spent about $1.5 million on consulting fees and plans, forming the Wild West World Inc. company to keep it separate from the original dinner experience. The plans for the park would be drawn up by BDR Design Group and its founder Bruce Robinson, a leader in the world of leisure and entertainment design, working with multiple theme parks, entertainment venues such as the Island in Pigeon Forge, and many more. Most recently, they worked on the Lost Island theme park. Robinson said that his goal in designing this new park was to create a captivating Wild West experience, and there would be a 3.5-story waving cowboy sign planned for the interstate to bring people in. Within, there will be a train, stagecoach rides, a carousel, and 2 roller coasters. A 25-year-old refurbished log flume that had previously been located at Western Playland in New Mexico, along with an Old West town square and 1,300-seat music venue. The best economic consultant services were brought in, and it seemed viable. The same company that did the consultations would regularly work for Disney, Universal, and all the big players in the industry, and deemed that they could potentially attract 288,000 visitors in the very first year. It wouldn't all go without trouble. Thomas Etheridge would delay breaking ground on Wild West World after struggling to find full financing for the project. Instead of starting on May 1st, it was promised that it would happen sometime this year, as he searched for the remaining amount of the $15 million he needed to create the park, while also looking for deals to have a hotel and several restaurants on board nearby. He consistently remained positive that the project would happen, saying that financing a project of this size was complicated and often ran into snags. But it didn't mean it wouldn't happen. Banks had already pledged around half the $15 million needed, and they were pledging their personal wealth as well as that of the Prairie Rose restaurant to try and make up the rest. By August, financing of the original $15 million appeared to be in place, with future plans to expand even further already set in stone, with a water park and more rides. $10 million for the project came from investors abroad, specifically to finance the rides, as rides are deemed a liability to American investors. While it was deemed too wet to move dirt, Thomas Etheridge proclaimed that Monday, August 15, 2005 was the official start of construction for his Wild West World theme park, and an opening date was set for May 5, 2007. Etheridge conducted the ceremony in his over-the-top style, stating some people call him the P.T. Barnum of Cowboys, and he was betting big, expecting it to pay off when those 280,000 people visited the park in its first year. He often called it the only fully Western theme park anywhere in the world. It was not. Just a few weeks after ground had broken, Thomas Etheridge called a news conference. He announced to officials that he had served more than 3 years in prison for securities fraud in the 1980s. A former associate of his was about to go public with the story, but he stated that cowboys don't get blackmailed. There was also local TV working on a story on Etheridge's past. He wanted to lay out his past before the story aired. Supported by his wife, he said his plans for the $15 million Wild West theme park would remain unchanged, and he had no plans to hide his past. He said he often spoke about his time in prison to church groups for years, and his story appeared in the 2004 book, Real Men, Real Faith, about Christians undergoing trials in their lives, which he regularly handed out to people. This book details some of Thomas Etheridge's history. As told by him, let me give you the quick version. He grew up in a cattle-raising family in Texas and devoted all his spare time to business, forming his skills in bartering, trading, and selling. Making a profit, fixing up cars, oil rigs, or anything he could. He was doing big business by the time he turned 21. By 1984, he created and sold his oil and drilling companies and put all his money in investments and banking. That was when he got a visit from SEC agents. Etheridge would be facing a lengthy indictment for security violations revolving around the merchant banking activities and his investments his company was involved in. When they came calling, he was overseas. Etheridge would not return to the USA. He stated, as advised by his attorneys, to stay out of the country, and he went through Europe to Hong Kong, Singapore, and later Africa, before moving to Central America and starting an aloe vera plantation. His family and children were in Texas still, under enormous pressure, but would eventually join him in Central America. During a business trip to Canada to sell products, Texas agents raided his plantation, and they would remain stuck in Canada, where they would start a new business, weight reduction clinics. Now in 1985, Thomas Etheridge was a wanted man by the American authorities, as well as Scotland Yard and Interpol. According to him in his book, he would make the decision to return to Texas and try and resolve his problems, accepting extradition and plan to prove his innocence, ending up in a Texas jail. During this time, his wife and family would leave him. His houses, businesses, and assets were gone, and he would be facing huge jail time. Throughout, he claims he insisted his innocence, yet everyone believed he was guilty. The book states it was here, in jail, that Thomas Etheridge found the church and Jesus. In 1989, while in jail after many court hearings, according to the book, he pleaded no contest to securities fraud and would serve over 3 years in prison. Throughout, he had maintained that he was innocent, saying that he pleaded no contest to the final cases as he had no will or money left to fight. The charges involved selling unregistered securities and making false and misleading statements in selling securities to several residents. It was this year on his release that he met Cheryl through the prison ministry, and shortly after they were married, and he moved to her home near Wichita, Kansas. Together they would start over with their ranching roots, purchasing 40 acres and building a home, and it will be here that the thinking outside of the box attempt at a restaurant would begin. Over a decade after being released from prison in 1999 with the Prairie Rose Chuck Wagon Supper, and the family would continue to make church a major part of their life. Park City officials at the news conference said they had been aware of Etheridge's past since last year. Others stated that Etheridge had volunteered the information to them in the past, and what happened in the past was the past. Wild West World would go ahead as planned, and those involved stood by him. By December, the giant cowboy sign was up and ready for the park to open the following year. In November 2005, the park would greet the arrival of the first ride, the O.D. Hopkins Water Log Flume, which would reach heights of over 50 feet. The final packages of rides coming to the attraction was confirmed at the 2005 IAAPA Expo, totaling $7 million, the majority of which would come from Zamperla, with additional rides from Chance. As the park got closer to opening, more details of what would come would be promised. A spinning coaster costing $1.2 million was said to be the highlight, and the park proudly stated it was just like Primeval Whirl at Disney's Animal Kingdom, though this one was purchased used from Myrtle Beach Grand Prix, where it had opened in 1999. There was also the second roller coaster, a cowboy-themed wacky worm. Absolutely terrifying looking. Just look at it. It is horrifying. They had hopes to purchase a big wooden coaster or a big steel one soon after opening, stating that they wanted it to become the signature attraction and it would be in the $3 to $4 million price range and ready to open 2 years after the park debuts. Not one ride was really created for the park at opening, They were all off-the-shelf models that could be found elsewhere, but each would be fitted with some sort of cowboy theme. And some, as I said, absolutely terrifying. The centerpiece of the park would be the Johnny Western Theater, which would open earlier in September 2006, named after Wichita's Western recording and TV star and friend of Thomas Etheridge. Events would begin to be held in the venue right away as the theme park was built around it. The Etheridge's new church group would also move into the building. The theme park was ahead of schedule, according to the owners, and rides were being installed and excitement was at an all-time high for the Wild West world. They also continually stated that work was underway planning the extreme thrill coaster that would come to the park in 2 years. Thomas Etheridge stated that he invited you to get ready to see the world come to the state of Kansas. The project manager for the attraction would be Ron Burney, former manager of Kentucky Kingdom. The final park design was done by Law Kingdon Architects. From concept to creation, it had taken just a little over 2 years to create Wild West World. They continued to maintain that they expected from May to October 500,000 visitors would visit the United States' brand new theme park, generating $15.5 million in revenue. Wild West World expected to turn a profit in the very first year. They stated they had already sold $750,000 worth of season passes in January 2007. A month later, they were stating that they had sold 10,000 season passes and the revenue had already topped $1 million. Though half of that came from events that were running at the theater. Everyone believed they were going to bring a lot of excitement to Wichita. The park was nearly ready, and Etheridge said that he had been working 20 hours a day for months, and he and Cheryl had poured their hearts, souls, and lives into the project. Just as exciting was the boom to the local area, expecting huge revenue to start pouring in soon. From hotels to restaurants and shopping, the economy nearby was about to get its massive boost when the park was opened. A week before opening, a group of kids aged 8 to 18 got to experience the park. Well, the rides which were ready anyway, and the reaction was mixed. Some of them had been to bigger parks and were not very impressed, while others thought it was the best thing ever. Thomas Etheridge knew that this would just be the start, and the park had to constantly expand and grow each year to bring people back, and continued to insist that our new highlight was coming with the large coaster planned for the banks of the park's lake in 2009. Now stated as a $4 million wooden coaster. He said that if the park was not a success in its first year, he would be homeless. Industry experts, however, continued to tell him for what he had built, the plan would work. The problem was, it did not cost $15 million, the budget had soared to $28 million, nearly double. Though he was still told the investment was worth it and reasonable for what he had made, and that they were on the right path. Wild West World now reported they had sold 34,000 season passes in the past 18 months. With a 10-year tax abatement that was given from Park City, expectations for the money to pour in were high. Behind the scenes though, unknown to everyone on the outside, the park was already financially struggling. Over budget at $28 million, billed as the first theme park in Kansas, and the first all-Western themed amusement park in the world, Wild West World opened on May 5th, 2007. As visitors walked through the park, they would mostly find standard rides in a pretty nice layout around a lake in the Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas sections of the park. Opening day had 2 rides not ready, the now called Prairie Plunge Log Flume and the Condor Ride, as they were still waiting for parts from overseas delayed by customs. They also blamed the weather for the delays, even though they had stated many times how ahead of schedule the park was. The park anticipated 8,000 to 10,000 people on opening day. 4,500 people went. High winds and clouds were blamed on the lower than expected attendance. The park was now saying they had sold 15,000 season passes before, and most visitors had used them. The response to the park was that it was pretty good, better than the outdated Joyland anyway. Though small and nothing special, it had potential to grow. Wild West World's first month was not good, with bad weather causing attendance to fall short of projections. Etheridge said he sure picked a bad month to open and should have waited till closer to the summer. The state also had a deadly tornado the night before the grand opening that did not help. In the first month, the park's marketing director, Ryan Cole, resigned, blaming a poor marketing plan and micromanagement from the Etheridges before he moved to a job at Hershey Park, saying Thomas needed to listen to his staff. While he was good at business, he does not listen when it comes to the theme park side of the operation. At the same time, Chief Financial Officer for the park also stepped down for health reasons. And this was just the first month. Cole stated the park's attendance was at least 50% lower than expected. Etheridge, however, said the numbers are a little better than that. He insisted it was just the weather, and the tornadoes around opening didn't help. Over a month after opening, the mud-covered park, as landscaping was still yet to happen, finally opened one of the last 2 rides remaining. One of them would never open at all. They stated it was just too muddy to bring in a crane to finish it. 32 of the park's first 37 days were rainy or overcast, and it definitely didn't help. But Wild West World cost nearly twice as much to build as planned due to underestimated construction costs, delays due to weather, and rising interest rates, along with the park owners spending money without a thought or budget. Attendance was off by over 1,000 from projections, with an average of 1,400 a day actually visiting, but the Etheridges remain confident, working day and night to try and make it work, insisting that the park would meet projections and July and August crowds would make up for it, and there was no problem. The park would introduce coupons for cheaper entrance to try and entice people in. During that first month, more employees left, and turnover was high, including the director of food services and the gaming and retail director. The opinion of the park had begun to turn, with many already pointing out its failures and that it wouldn't make it. When asked about issues with its micromanaging, Etheridge said, "I totally control everything, every little bit of it. Everything I've got is on the line. $8 million was owed to Kansas banks and the Small Business Administration. Millions more to international banks, and they were heavily in debt." The Etheridges had also borrowed against their house and insurance policies. He had often been traveling to Europe to try and gain more funding for the project. Despite strain in the first month, he insisted that everything was paid up to date and investors were happy. The banks agreed and said it would be short-sighted to have concerns already when it was a great product. The reality was, behind the scenes, the park was scrounging for money even before it opened, but they believed it would all pay off in the end. On Sunday, July 8th, just over 2 months since opening, reporters asked if the park had a future. The Etheridges said it would not close. The next day, on July 9th, 2007, announced by Thomas and his lawyer, Wild West World would close and file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The company stated they were looking for a buyer for the park immediately, and that the park would be returning. The blame lay on the weather, as 50 of the 60 operating days had poor weather. Never before had a theme park that opened close so quickly. A buyer had to be found by the end of the year, and everyone who invested with the bankruptcy announced were now searching for ways to recoup their money. The closure came as a surprise. Some employees said the weather wasn't the real problem, that Wild West World was the worst managed place they had ever worked. It turned out that the numbers thrown around for season ticket sales were drastically exaggerated, with about 3,000 actually sold. If the park would ever return did not look likely, as whoever would buy the park would have to settle the debts and still pay for the rides. Thomas Etheridge, the man who had an answer for everything and could sell anything, was quiet, declining to speak as he believed the media were treating him unfairly and always twisted what he said. Until recently, the area embraced, celebrated, and encouraged the future of tourism that he promised, praising his vision. Now, with a closed and failed park, the story had changed. When he announced in 2005 about his past, the city and investors, along with the public, stood by him, talking about the dream of rebuilding one's life after trouble. The reports then focused on his success, rather than the failures. He was a man who had overcome difficulties, but was about to make the area better, and he had changed. A person you trusted because he was honest with you and upfront. Now, the finger was pointed directly at him for this failure. Though many did not believe that anything illegal occurred, just bad decisions. Others commented that he had put himself as the face of this project, a hero for the area, and that he was now acting surprised that he was the one that people were blaming. Regardless, the Kansas Securities Commission would open an investigation into Etheridge's investments. Banks allowed employees to cash their final checks, well, most of them anyway, and lawyers for the family insisted that he had nothing to hide and was cooperating fully with the investigation. Less than a month after the theme park closed, the Etheridges were forced to close the Prairie Rose Chuck Wagon Supper, the place that inspired the theme park in the first place, with the attraction, the family home, and items from a cowboy museum at the site would be put up for auction. The attendance at the dinner show had been declining somewhat in the last few years, since the family had focused on Wild West World, but was still selling out shows regularly. The lawsuits were about to come fast. Many of the smaller investors for the park came from Thomas Etheridge's church, and many of them no longer believed in him, hurt and felt deceived that they had lost their savings to this dream and would never see their money again. Just months before the park opened, Thomas Etheridge was urging friends at his church to invest their money into the financially strapped theme park, calling it a good investment as he struggled to cover payroll, and the calls were beginning that Etheridge was taking advantage of people, knowing that the park was struggling before it had even opened. He would later claim he never persuaded anyone to invest, that they were offering to help as they believed in the project. They had believed in Thomas as they had seen the banks do. While looking in from the outside, you couldn't tell, but the park had been in financial trouble dating back to late 2006. There was even a point when Etheridge tried to sell the whole park before it had opened. By September 2007, after the park closed, the church had moved out and into a motel, and it would be these members of the church who invested in the park that would be the main group that would back the court case. Surprisingly, in August, the park had a potential buyer, a new company from California that was ready to offer $12 million to buy Wild West World. Parks America of Santa Monica, a sister company of Great American Theme Parks, had submitted a letter of interest and plans to reopen for 2008. After visiting the park, they did not make an offer, but said they would make one within a month if the park's creditors were willing to wait that long. The aftermath of the abandoned theme park was a huge mess. The church sued Wild West World for land they had bought, banks tried to seize rides to reclaim losses, the Karate Kid's dad sued, and Pepsi sued for $2.5 million over a 10-year park sponsorship agreement. The IRS got involved over unpaid taxes. Next, the FBI got involved in the investigation. A deadline was set for the sale of the park for September 28, 2007, with Parks America eventually backing out of the purchase, marking the end of the line for Wild West World. Everything that could be sold would be. Rides went to small amusement parks around the US and even abroad. Hershend purchased the Sidewinder ride for $475,000 and moved it to Wild Adventures. Other attractions can still be found operating today. Restoration Farms, Thomas Etheridge's other company, would also file for bankruptcy, and what was left after the liquidation would be put up for auction. While Wild West World's story had ended incredibly quickly, the issues would continue for the Etheridges. The remaining land and assets were eventually sold to the AHG Group, a Florida investment company specializing in casinos. They themselves would later get sued relating to broken promises with the land. At one point, there was some hope that the park would reopen with new rides. Still, many didn't believe that Thomas Etheridge intended to rip people off. More so, that his ego believed that he couldn't fail with his idea. Those most hurt, though, saw him now as a con man who had pulled the same trick again. Immediately after the park's closure, the Etheridge's family left the area and could not be found. He had begun working as a manager at an alpaca ranch near San Antonio and refused to take any questions. He would then go into business with that ranch, using the ranch owner's family money to expand and trying to convince them to help him take a trip to Dubai for a fiber marketing trip. One report says that the alpaca ranch alone yielded him and his wife $170,000 from August 2007, at the very same time as Wild West World was still unraveling a month after closing. While the weather did play a part, it couldn't be blamed for the end of Wild West World. It could only be that after going over budget, which the park didn't have any backup plan for, the place was undercapitalized and unprepared for the slow start, and the fact Wild West World just wasn't really that good or special didn't help. Incredibly high payroll costs, long operating hours, and, ultimately, a lack of funds were the final nail in the coffin for the park before it had even opened. Wild West World never had a chance to succeed, the shortest-lived theme park. Today, shells of buildings remain the same, abandoned. Much, though, has been demolished. The Prairie Rose Dinner Show was sold and turned into a year-round venue for a cowboy church, and continued the Chuck Wagon Suppers, eventually stopping them over a decade later, and today still offers a variety of music concerts and dinners. The golden entrepreneur of the area had lost everything, and the risk had not paid off. In late April 2009, Thomas Etheridge was arrested at the airport on a Kansas warrant as the fraud investigation had finally wrapped up. Kansas law required that investors must receive an accurate picture of a business's financial status before investing, and this had not been provided to some who invested. The biggest issue being his use of the church members' money and the claim that he did not provide them with enough information about his past to those investing. Wild West World's money from late 2006 was non-existent. They were transferring money from their other businesses and looking for a way to sell the park behind the scenes, while telling investors it was a great financial success and they would get a good return after the initial startup. Those that had praised him during his creation now said that they were not surprised, and those that stood by him when he came out with his past said the history of the man speaks for itself. Some said they believed he preyed on church people's consciences and used religion to swindle them out of money. Others, Wild West World did not look like a theme park that should have cost $26 million, and claimed that he was using the money for himself while pretending that the park needed more. Each person testifying against him did mention that they felt pressured that the money was urgent. People who had been close to him said that they doubted he would feel bad if he ever did come back to Wichita to face his charges. If he did, they expected him to be angry, verbal, and self-righteous, saying that he was the true victim, believing that he truly did try and help the area with his theme park. Others felt pity for him, saying they saw the truth inside, that his spirit was just misguided and once again ended in disaster for him. While people who invested lost everything, so did he. Again. Many, though, were not convinced, saying it was all just a long con. Others, that he truly believed he could make something special, yet when it struggled, went back to his old ways. Thomas Etheridge was arrested on 10 counts of securities fraud totaling $800,000, much of which was raised by the church he attended. The hour-long opening statement stated that Etheridge omitted or represented facts to entice investors into giving him money. More details came out on his earlier arrest during this trial. First, a felony theft for bouncing a check in Texas, where he had served 6 months in jail in the late 70s. Second, for the previously announced jail time for securities frauds in the 80s, where he was charged with dozens of counts of securities fraud, including engaging in a business. Investors here were told they would have 25% returns, and the company was backed by a $5 million Swiss bank account, none of which was true. The operation was reported as a scheme where investors were being paid off with money contributed by later investors, and much of the investors' cash was spent on personal and travel expenses. Many questioned where that $28 million actually went. During this trial, there were many contradictions compared to what was written in the faith book, including that he was already a devout Christian and often quoting the Bible, and that he was actually arrested in Canada on charges of being an illegal alien and deported back to the USA. He pleaded not guilty and said investors would have gotten their money, claiming to be a misunderstood pioneer of the banking industry who had been victimized. As he testified, he said that he had never intended to use private investors to finance the park due to his past experience, but was forced to when the park was struggling. He maintained that he was innocent, and continued to say he was also innocent back in the late 80s with his earlier issues. During the trial, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and suffered a stroke, causing delays. He was convicted on February 10, 2010 of 7 counts of securities fraud, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was paroled on July 29, 2013. The story of Wild West World is not really just one of a failed theme park, but one of a man, the cowboy entrepreneur whose theme park was one of the quickest failures in the industry, and a man who had it all and had lost it multiple times. Did he dream big, gamble and fail, or did he con people for money who trusted him and paid the price? The answer varies depending on who you ask. Today, whatever the truth, Wild West World still sits abandoned in Kansas. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Expedition Extinct. If you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe to join the expedition, follow us on social media for updates on upcoming episodes, and a special thank you to our Patreons for supporting the channel. We will see you next time.